Okay, so tonight I am here with Jordan, otherwise known as Monistic Idealism from YouTube. And yeah, Jordan got in touch with me after the recent panel discussion that I put out on my second channel, where we're talking about sort of materialism versus idealism. And as the name no doubt suggests, Jordan is more in the idealism camp, and he wanted to sort of chime in with his own ideas. And I think that's a great thing because I would say from my own perspective, although I've got my own kind of beliefs around these things, I wouldn't consider myself a scholar of any of these things. These are just the ideas that form in my head and wherever I'm leaning at that particular time. So I was really interested to have someone who's really does, go all in on one of these kind of beliefs. So we could just have a bigger discussion about it. And also I thought it might be interesting to see in that kind of framing where I might end up, if I might end up being more on the sort of on a different side of the argument than I thought I was at. So, I mean, with that said, yeah, Jordan, thanks a lot for coming on and making the time to be here, mate. And maybe just introduce yourself, your channel, your sort of background, and your beliefs about idealism.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to get to talk with all of you guys. So yeah, I run a channel called Monistic Idealism, and I just bring together academic and popular level information. So I try to, I do academic research, but I also try to make it in a way that you can communicate it to a broader audience. And idealism is basically this view that reality, instead of it being entirely physical or it being both mental and physical, we see it as entirely mental. And I just want to help people understand that view because there's a lot of misunderstandings about it. And I'll make the case for it. And but in general, a good place to start would be to just break it down so people can really get it.
Please do.
And so there we go. All right. So like I said before, many people think everything is either of those two. Everything is made of matter. Or they think there is spirit and matter, or mental and matter, something like that. So idealism is a third way. It's a different view. It says there's really only one type of stuff, just like the materialist says. But instead of it being matter, we think it's consciousness, you could call it. You could call it a mental substance or spirit. There's many different ways that idealists talk about this. But really, that's what we mean. And to be clear, when we say that, we don't mean objects don't exist, because many people think that. Tables and chairs are real. Objects are still there, even when you're not looking at them. It's just that instead of looking at them as a physical object, you look at them as a mental object, sort of like the objects in your dreams. So everything's there, everything's persistent. It's a view of reality. We think it's real, but it's just not dualism and it's not materialism.
Okay, so let me try and put my own sort of framing upon that. So you're saying that there is an underlying substrate of something, of data, of I could call it data because I'm an IT person, so I tend to think of everything in terms of data and things. But you're saying that there is an underlying something.
Yes, absolutely. I personally believe there is an objective reality, you could say.
Okay. But you would say that the basis for that objective reality, like the primary, is consciousness.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I'm going to try and play like devil's advocate a little bit here and sort of throw a few things at you and just see. So, let me just kind of probe it a little bit further first. So what would be the difference there between, say, that view and something like solipsism? This kind of idea that everything is inside my head. I am imagining everything.
That's such a good question. I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big misunderstanding a lot of people have about idealism. They think it is solipsism. So the big difference is that solipsism is the view is that basically only you exist. Only the self is real, or only your mind is real. Idealism generally is the view that there's just a mental substance that makes up reality. So they can still believe other minds are real. It's some solipsists are idealists, but not all idealists are solipsists. So we can.
Well, there's a few different variations on solipsism as well. So I mean that's also got its own kind of branches of people believing that it is entirely just one person. And then I believe there's multiple variations of solipsism. I've not hugely studied that area, but that's my understanding.
You're right. Because some people look at it like this, where they think just my individual ego, just like, just me, Jordan, only I exist. While others look at it more like you are me and every person is me. Everything is identical to me. So that is a kind of solipsism. And they may say these things are real because they are me and I'm real. But others might think, no, just me is real. All these objects are not me, therefore they're not real. So you're right. That's a good distinction to make.
So just before we started recording, you mentioned you had some slides or something you want to share that might help unpack this idea for the audience. Is that something you could share with us now?
Absolutely, yes. So I just sort of broke down idealism generally before, just so you guys understand it in a broad sense. But now I'm going to make an argument for it. So I'm sharing my screen, or at least attempting to. It looks like it's loading. All right. So here we go. This should only take like 3 minutes. So this is the argument from mental causation for idealism, but it's also called the causal closure argument. It's basically the main argument for physicalism, but just turned on its head. So premise one is the causal closure of the universe. And I'll break all this down, by the way. So premise one, the causal closure of the universe. Every event which is caused has a cause from an event that is the same in type or in kind, meaning events that interact must be of the same type of stuff, or the same type of substance and properties. Premise two, the irreducibility of consciousness. The mental is subjective and it's qualitative in type, and it cannot be reduced to or identified as a objective or a quantitative phenomenon. So the mental is its own type of stuff. There's a mental stuff, mental substance.
Okay.
Premise three, mental events cause physical events. For example, we normally think that events such as consciously deciding to raise your arm, which is a mental event, cause events such as the raising of your arm, which is a physical event. And the conclusion is that physical events are mental in type, or that idealism is true. So if only events that are the same in type can interact, and the mental is its own type and causes physical events, then physical events must itself be mental in type. So the universe and anything that can be interacted with is mental in type. So, and here's this next part. If one tries to deny one of these premises, then they're going to inevitably face these intractable philosophical problems. So if you deny the first premise of causal closure, you're going to face what they call the mind-body problem, which is the problem of how the mental and physical can interact. And this has been a problem that has plagued philosophers for centuries, with no accepted solution to this day. If you deny the second premise, and if you want to say consciousness is reducible, well, then you face the hard problem of consciousness. It's the problem of how to make sense of something mental in terms of something non-mental. It's kind of like the mind-body problem. This problem has been around for a very long time, and it's intractable, and there's no accepted solution. If you deny the third premise, the causal efficacy of consciousness, then you're going to lose explanatory power when it comes to explaining behavior. And this goes against the best theories that we have in the science of behavior. As stated in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, contemporary psychology and philosophy largely share the conviction that the explanation of behavior cannot omit invoking a creature's experience of its world. Psychology must use psychological terms. Behavior without cognition is blind. Psychological theorizing without reference to internal cognitive processing is explanatorily impaired, end quote. So in conclusion, the implication is that the only way to keep the irreducibility and causal efficacy of consciousness while affirming causal closure is to embrace idealism. And so that's the argument that I would give for idealism.
Okay, let's have a stab at these.
Yes.
So my initial thoughts, I was kind of the second slide. I kind of got lost a little bit in the weeds there. But let's try and unpack it for an idiot like me. So I suppose with the first one, with premise one, all events are caused by events that are the same in type. But that seems to make sense on a kind of a short-term window. But if what we're talking about is that, again, if my understanding is correct, and please do correct me if I'm goofing this up, consciousness is the primary force that creates everything. So consciousness comes before matter. That's what we're saying.
Well, basically, what this is concluding is that what you call matter, it just is more consciousness. It's not like there's two different stuff where consciousness creates matter. It's that it's all just consciousness. That's all there is.
Okay. So there's no matter at all. It's all, everything is just pure consciousness. But are we again? I think this is where I kind of, it seems to be blending a little bit into the kind of like the dream of God type stuff. So. Right. Or like something also similar to kind of like simulation theory then, because it's got the appearance of matter, it's got the appearance of physicalness, and me as a sort of a being in this world, I can sort of instinctively, perhaps incorrectly, feel that I have a physical element to me, and there is an element of consciousness to it. So to me, this is why I kind of refer to myself as a bit of a fence sitter in that previous discussion, because instinctively it feels like there's some sort of dualism going on here, that there is both. And I suppose what would be I would say what you've laid out kind of makes it makes sense as a sort of as an argument, but I think it also makes sense if you flip it on its head and you went from the kind of, the material way. So if material comes first, and then consciousness as a property of material. Here you've got kind of material as a property of consciousness. So although I think there's a bit more with consciousness feeling a bit more exotic, then it feels like it's somehow easier or it's somehow less work for matter to just be a construct of consciousness. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's fine. It makes sense, but I think the opposite also makes sense, and dualism also makes sense. And then, yeah. So I would, bit of a word salad, but I'll throw that back at you and see what you can do with that.
Oh yeah, I'm sympathetic to all of that. Yeah, I mean, I started off as a substance dualist. I was not always an idealist. I totally get this intuitive idea of, well, there's the mind and there's the body. But as an idealist, how I see that is really what I really think about what that duality is. Really, there's the subject, and then there's experiences that the subject has. Like you said, there's this feeling of a body, what they may call proprioception. Mm-hmm. You can feel the motion of the movement of all of that, of your arms moving around, and you can feel pain, and you can touch things and smell, and the things you would call the body. Yes, I believe all that's there. But the more I think about it, when I ask the question, well, what is the body? Really, it just seems to be an experience that is had by the subject. And think about the body in your own dream. I'm glad you brought up dreams. You notice how even in your dreams, there's a kind of dream body, unless you have like a third person perspective, which happens sometimes. Mm-hmm. But even in there, you have this sensation of a body. But really, it's just an experience that you're having. And same thing for all the objects that you see in a dream. It's just an experience in the mind. And so, likewise, in waking life, it's the experience in the ultimate mind, in the fundamental mind. And
do you think that all matter is having an experience?
I don't think matter itself has experiences, but I think what we call matter really just is experience. It's just an experience that a subject is having, just like the objects in your dreams.
So would you say there's any sort of difference between myself and, say, the table in front of me? I get that the table is something that I am experiencing, so therefore it is. But is like if I go and interact with another person, like I'm interacting with you now, I'm assuming that you would say that I'm interacting with another person capable of subjective experience, and that we are both kind of equal players within this sort of realm of consciousness. But would you say the same thing about something that we are perceiving as a rock, a table, a wall, something like that?
No, great question. Yeah, so I would say no. Objects like rocks and tables and chairs, they are not subjects that have experiences. They are just an experience of a subject. So I think you are a subject, but I don't think that the chair is a subject.
Then why would there be a distinction in the I suppose if the realm is consciousness and the realm is populated by let's objects, of which we are one of those objects, and which trees are an object, and birds and bees and all the other animals. So these are all. Why would only some of them, be selected to have this kind of experience? Or what would be your? If I say why, it's putting a bit much in. But what would be your rationale there? Because it seems like if everything is equal mind stuff, then why would it not all be? I mean, let me just
Sure, take your time.
Sidetrack a little bit. Yeah, would you say like plants are having an experience?
Yeah, I'm inclined to think plants. Yeah, biological entities. I'm inclined to think most biological entities, if not all biological entities, seem to be subjects. They're alive and all of that. But,
yeah, so they're having some kind of experience, but you wouldn't extend that to sort of like I say, what we would call inanimate objects.
Yeah. So a view, you may have heard of it. It's called panpsychism. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, panpsychism, sure.
Yeah. So it's possible to combine my view with panpsychism. You could believe in that view and think, yeah, maybe tables and chairs are subjects, but personally, I don't. But how I differentiate them, what makes me believe that they're not, is because not all mental entities are subjects. There's for instance like a thought. You can have a thought of a box, but the thought itself is not a subject. The thought doesn't have thoughts. It's not experiencing anything. It's just an idea in a subject. So anxiety or happiness, anything that you would consider mental, most things you can consider mental, aren't subjects. They're just a mental object. Just like how a materialist who could also believe in panpsychism, a materialist could say, yes, my mind is physical, but I don't think all physical things have minds. So while I believe everything is mental in its nature, in its substance, I don't think all things are subjects. And I just don't see a reason to believe that they would be. But I'm open-minded to that for sure.
So what is the kind of view of what something like ourselves is? Are we, because I'm assuming that there is, within this kind of worldview, there is some kind of boundary that makes me and me not, say the rock or the other object. So is my thinking right? Am I some kind of object within this realm?
I'm more inclined to use the language that you are a subject, but someone could use the language of you are an object of experience. Like from their perspective, you are something they are experiencing. They can see like the body, for instance.
So what would be the sort of the upper container of like what is containing this experience?
Okay, what I believe, and not all idealists believe this, but what I think, and I have arguments for this, is that there's ultimately one fundamental mind. Sort of like a dream. When you have a dream and you contain that dream world, that's what this universe is. It is the dream of a fundamental consciousness.
See, that does sound a lot like the kind of some of the branches of solipsism. So this would be the typical one that you hear a lot around particularly within psychedelic circles, is something quite similar to Hinduism, that we are there is some being somewhere having a dream, and that everything is just an aspect of that dream. So would that map onto your sort of worldview?
No,
That we're
no. Oh, pardon me. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to ramble more along that theme, but please,
that's fine. Sure, yeah. So solipsism, remember, is the view that really there's only one self, or there's only one mind, and this view I'm talking about.
How would that be? How would that be different from what you? Because it could be one mind having multiple. It's one mind as the container within which there is the dream, and then within the dream there is, because we're talking about some sort of omnipotent, infinite being here, which is capable of having multiple parallel, infinite parallel existences all across time, all across space, all across the universe, all at the same time. It is all just a dream of God. Now that's wrapped up in a lot of sort of, almost like religious and sort of, that sort of language. But if my understanding is right, it maps fairly one-to-one to what you've just described, in that there is at the highest level there is one container, a dreamlike container, within which so there is no sort of what materialists would call physical matter. There is just whatever is happening within that container, within the dream, and within the dream there are as many instances, subjects as there needs to be, and they are all having the experience that this is the table and this is Rob and I, and it's the illusion, it's the Maya of the experience, but ultimately it's just a dream. So from what I'm hearing, it does sound it's solipsism, with a slice of lemon on top.
So yeah. So let me just explain. So it's not solipsism, because I do believe other minds exist. There are other distinct selves. It's just that fundamentally, at the fundamental level of reality, there is what's called the one, or the absolute. But other subjects derive from the one. So there are other minds. I don't think there's only one mind, or that there's only one self. You and me are distinct selves. We're distinct people. Mm-hmm. Your mind is not my mind. But our minds are part of a fundamental mind. So it's not solipsism.
Well, like I say, it could be a branch. It's one of the variations of solipsism. But as I mentioned, it's still it's close to the Hindu sort of belief. There is the one, one God, and that God, in an effort to entertain itself, is having multiple dreams of deceiving itself. So each one is a perfect instance of an individual. So I am an individual. I am God, convinced that I am Rob, and I am having this experience of being. I am the universe finding out what is it like to be Rob, and here I am running that program, and so I suppose apart from shifting the sort of the language around a little bit, and then the names of the containers, I think it sounds like ultimately we've got one big source, one mind, one consciousness, one God, one source. Again, whatever label you want to put it, there's one thing at the top from which all other things are birthed or instanced, and they're instanced within the same stuff as that thing itself. So it's within the illusion, within the consciousness, within the dream, whatever kind of wording you want to put on it. There is something at the top that is birthing the individual instances.
Right, and one thing I want to make clear too is because I know this happened. This is very easy to get to. When I say dream, I don't mean it's an illusion. There are several authors like May Sinclair, who say things like dreams are real while they last. Mm-hmm. So I think this world is real. It's just an experience. That's what it means to be real. Really, is just to be an experience in this mind. And there are other minds, just to be clear. But I know I already said that.
Yeah, I think I understand that part. So I know you're not kind of we're not in the kind of like nothing is real. Let's all throw ourselves off buildings and that sort of stuff. So I get that it's kind of, it's real. I'm just wondering, I suppose where I get to with things like this is like, I don't know, it like I said, I don't think it fundamentally changes the way anything presents, or it's, I think the argument can be made from both sides, and it's kind of like, yeah, I get why you could sort of go down this route. I get why you can go down, I certainly get why the materialists can go down materialism. I think probably most people have been very materialist at one point because it's just what we're kind of brought up with. But I don't know, what's, when I'd be interested in knowing what was your kind of route that brought you here? Like why do you sort of how did you come into this belief, and what convinced you that this was the correct argument, so to say?
Sure. So like I said, I started off as a substance dualist, but a big thing that happened to me was I encountered the mind-body problem. I kept, trying to struggle with how do I make sense of how a physical and a non-physical substance can interact. How is this supposed to make sense? It's sort of like Casper, the ghost, when he's trying to grab the girl's hand. It just kind of goes right through the hand. It's like, how is this supposed to work? And the more I tried to make sense of it metaphysically, even on a scientific level, whatever, it just didn't seem to work. And so I began to explore monism more. And
could you maybe unpack a little bit about what was it like you made this? You don't think it works? Like, can you? I mean, I
Yes.
get the Casper example, but I suppose as soon as you say that, I'm thinking of, just things like robotics and stuff like that. Like what, the brain's often compared to like a computer, and while I don't think that's correct, I think it on some level it works as an analogy. There do seem to be ways of converting energy into motion, into very complex motion these days. So what is it about that seems so kind of like fundamentally broken to you?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So just like you said, I'm glad you brought up energy, because a point that is often brought up in this is what's called the conservation of energy. Are you familiar with that? Okay, yeah. So we see this universe as a kind of closed system, and so if you did have like a something outside the universe causing things in the universe, that seems to be violating the conservation of energy. You seem to be adding new energy into the system that wasn't there before. And if you weren't, well, then why would you even need that other stuff outside the universe to explain what's happening within it? You see, like you don't. It seems to be violating.
I didn't quite get the leap to stuff outside of the universe.
Okay, yeah. So let's say let's try to think like a substance dualist for a second. So there's the physical cosmos, and then there's the non-material soul or non-material mind, however you call it. Okay. Well, if the physical cosmos, if there is this idea that energy needs to be conserved, and you can't be adding new energy into it, well, then how is this mental stuff supposed to change anything? How is it supposed to, if it's not changing any energy, it can't introduce anything, it can't remove anything, it doesn't seem to be doing anything, if that's the case, at least if we affirm the conservation of energy. Do you see that?
No, I wouldn't see that. I would see it as that all these things would be within the same closed system, and that one is just a transfer of one thing to another. So let's let me play with the kind of the materialist viewpoint here. So consciousness is just something that's emerging from my brain, and it's emerging from my brain because I have sufficient nutrients and stuff in my brain. My body. That's what's powering my brain. So the energy has come into my body. My body is converting it into energy available for my brain. My brain is converting that into consciousness. Consciousness is thinking, hey, Rob, you want to pick up this glass and have a drink from it to give me more nutrients, to do more brain stuff. And that all seems to be perfectly all happening within the same system, and this is the same closed universe system. And we could even expand that further if we wanted to go down to sort of wackier theories of that. If the thing that was motivating my consciousness or motivating my body to move in a certain way was actually coming from some fourth dimensional psychedelic entity place, well, that's still within the same system. It's everything is happening within the same universe. So no matter how wacky the theory gets, even if we get into stuff like like Casper the Ghost and paranormal stuff, it's all still within the same system. So I'm not quite being able to follow you on what the jump is to.
Well, yeah. So here's what can help. So because if it's one system, well, then that's really monism. Okay, in which case there aren't really two different kinds of things, and that's what I'm ultimately trying to get at. But if you think there are two different kinds of things, if you think there is a mental and a physical, well, then there's two systems, not just one system. There's the physical cosmos system, and then there would be the mental system, and you would somehow have to figure out, how do they interact? How does this work? And so if you have just one system like I want, there's no problem. But in order to do that, you either need to be a materialist, which if you try to go that route, you're going to have the hard problem of consciousness. But if you go the idealist route, you don't have the hard problem of consciousness, and you can totally make sense of everything in just one closed system. And if you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say only if it's. I always want to think that with the way these kind of belief systems go, and this applies to both like materialism and idealism, it seems to always kind of want to like go all in on one thing, like it's the one ring to rule them all kind of thing. And as someone who sort of does a lot of very bizarre experiences, then I don't necessarily see why it has to. Why we have to go all in on something like that. Why it can't be that the material universe and the conscious universe and the psychedelic universe and the sort of emotional universe, and as many kind of kingdoms as you want to have, are all just interacting side by side, with absolutely none of them coming first and being sort of dependent on other. And they are all interacting in some sort of weird and wacky way, and it doesn't actually need explaining. It's just happening. And particularly when you have some of these very strange sort of experiences with psychedelics, where it doesn't feel as binary as just consciousness and matter. You start getting all sorts of weird interactions, and then this kind of, I don't know, it doesn't feel like as critical to say, well, this must come first. What would be, and this kind of comes back to my fence sitting position from the previous panel discussion, like, why what is stopping all these things just happening at the same time?
Okay, so I definitely want to answer that. So I'm going to get to that. I'll just really quickly, I will say this as well. I won't forget. I just briefly, I'll read this to you real quick, and I'll wrap up this point about conservation.
You take your time, mate. It's fine. Please make a point.
Good. Okay, good. So this is from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's a peer-reviewed academic resource written by professors and stuff like that. So if you want to read it for yourself, you can go ahead. But I'll just read this very quick section here. It says, insofar as the body is a part of the physical system, it cannot be caused to move by anything other than something else within that system. But if the mind is not a part of that system, as a dualist might say, then its causal influence upon the body would be a foreign source of energy impinging upon the energy equilibrium of the universe, thereby violating conservation. So the inconsistency here is present in this statement here, where if you think there's mental causation, but there's conservation and dualism, that's the problem. But if you're a monist and you have conservation, mental causation, no issue at all. And so a big motivation for, because I think you were right, that you could flip the argument and go the materialist way. Well, why don't you go the materialist route? Well, as even Sam Harris points out, consciousness is not reducible to just neurons or the brain or even the body or anything else. There's a video he does where he calls it, the self is an illusion is what the name of the video is called. Mm-hmm. But in the first minute of that video, he explains in vivid detail that we can't identify consciousness as a quote unquote physical phenomenon. And that's coming from a neuroscientist. So, but here's the problem, right? So if we are really convinced that consciousness isn't physical, but at the same time, if we need mental causation, and if we need something like closure, well, then it just seems to make more sense to just say we got to be idealists. Because if you try to go the materialist route, you have the hard problem. And if you go the dualist route, you got the mind-body problem. So idealism, out of all the options available, seems to be the only one that can actually keep the things we want to keep. All the other viewpoints just fail, as far as I can tell. And so when it comes to, well, why, I think maybe you can reword that question. What you said, why can't all these things just exist simultaneously? Or why?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So because to me, it's not that they don't exist simultaneously. It's just that there's a substance of reality. And the question is, what is that substance? And all the idealist is saying is that, well, that substance is consciousness. All of those things that you mentioned are real. They all exist. They all have causal powers. Some of them may even be fundamental as just, a part of consciousness. But ultimately, it's just the type of properties, the type of substance that these things are made of is consciousness, is all I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think I understand that. So I think in your worldview, you would say that you could have a universe with absolutely zero conscious beings in it at all, but bar the one at the top. But so let's say the very early stages of the universe where there's lots of very hot gas and rocks smashing into each other and stuff, and that would still be that would all be within consciousness.
Yeah,
it doesn't require anything other than the prime dream. I'm sorry, I forget what your wording was, but
like
the thing at the top.
Mind,
the mind, the one mind sort of thing, and that could be dreaming a universe completely devoid of life, but then that universe would. Let me ask a question. So within your worldview, I guess that's something that happened. You believe that at one point the universe was kind of devoid of separate conscious subjects?
I'm not entirely sure about that one, to be honest. I don't know.
Okay, that'd be interesting. Let's play around with that one.
Yeah,
because where I'm going with that is that if you have so you have the prime mind, it dreams. And again, forgive my wording if I'm not trying to.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, but you're good.
I hope you get what I mean. So it conjures. Oh, that's even a worse word. Let's stick with dream.
Well, okay. So I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So the universe comes into existence. It's all made of consciousness stuff, and from the kind of perspective of where we are now, this looks something like the Big Bang. This is like the universe explodes into being, and all the traces of what we think are the Big Bang, all the cosmic background radiation and galaxies flying off in different directions, which all appears to be there. This is all happening. It's all happening within the dream of the consciousness. And then within that dream, then sort of conscious, biology begins to form. So out of, we have all the same kind of the same trajectory of particles becoming sort of bigger pieces of matter, those kind of coalescing into biospheres and planets and stuff, and then within that biology emerging, and from within that biology, then the conscious subjects start emerging, and this is all happening within the dream of consciousness. Now, this is when I think phrased out like that, I'm not sure that that what you're describing is actually any simpler. To me, that's an incredibly complex set of sequence that you would have to go through in order to arrive at you and me. Now, in that sort of instance, I think the materialism, which again, for the record, I would not class myself as a materialist, but that actually seems much. If what we're going for is simplicity, that's simpler. Unless what we're actually talking about is that it just arrived fully baked, and that there was no evolutionary stuff, and that everything that we see in the universe that points towards that is actually just kind of some fakeness of the conscious dream in order to convince Rob and Jordan that this is actually what happened and give us something interesting to talk about. That doesn't seem simple to me. So let me throw that one back at you. And how does that fit into the worldview?
There you go. Great point. So how I see it as being simpler, because normally when we think of simplicity, like with Occam's razor and all that, we think in terms of the number of entities. Okay, and so when I think of an idealist viewpoint, I'm seeing less entities overall. So you have the fundamental consciousness, and then you just have derivative consciousness from there. You really only have one type of stuff there. You just have consciousness leading to more consciousness. But if you have a materialist viewpoint... Oh, sorry, so let me wrap this last point up here. But if you're a materialist...
go for it.
Then you're going to have this non-mental world giving rise to this mental stuff. And to me, that sounds like more, because before you only had consciousness and more consciousness, while in the other perspective, you need non-consciousness as well as consciousness. So it sounds like there's more entities with that perspective rather than the idealist one, which I'll admit needs more detail when it comes to explaining, the origins of life and stuff like that you brought up. Idealism has been quite neglected. There's more stuff that needs to be done. I'm an average guy like you. I'm not a PhD. I'm just a guy on the internet. So I'm hoping in the future, as idealism gets picked up more by real academics, then we can get better answers to that. So it may turn out better looking in the future when much smarter people than me can explain it. But I think overall, just in terms of the types of entities, the number of entities, idealism still comes out as simpler overall.
I think it would do if it was something like from the fundamental consciousness, it was kind of booting a... I mean, this almost kind of leans more toward it's simulation kind of thing. If it booted something that was fully baked, but this process of consciousness having to simulate creating matter, for that matter then to go through various stages of matter and, like I say, develop biology and evolve and blah, blah, over millions of years, with all this stuff making it look like there's a universe. For that then and only when you get to quite far down that chain, for it then to start birthing the subjects, which are the kind of following the template of the fundamental. That just seems incredibly convoluted. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't mean it's not right. That could be how it is. But again, I think if you then go down the Occam's razor route, then you could slice off the fundamental creator and have the same process, and it happens exactly like it does within consciousness. It's just materialism. Because I mean, just to come back to the question I asked you, do you? I mean, I'm not trying to hold your feet to the fire here, but do you believe in sort of in evolution? Is there a process that got us here, or did we kind of arrive fully baked? So do you believe in something like, and obviously not the materialist version, but something like the Big Bang and something like evolution and something like the universe forming over billions of years and stuff like that?
Yeah, please feel free to hold my feet to the fire. Yes, I would say I do believe in evolution. Yeah.
So then I guess my question would be, if we're going by Occam's razor, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it gets thrown into these kind of discussed a lot. Why not just slice off the fundamental consciousness and then and start with the Big Bang?
Well, yeah. So I guess because I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, because I think there's inevitably going to be this hard problem of consciousness. If you're trying to get consciousness from non-consciousness, I just don't think it works. It's like trying to put together a bunch of Legos to form a face, but you somehow think the face is more than the Legos. Like there's going to be like a face that will jump out of the Legos. It's like, no, all you have are Legos and you just put them together. And you can make very complicated formations of matter, but it doesn't matter how complicated it is. It's just more matter. You're not going to get consciousness magically out of non-consciousness. That's my perspective. So I think...
I don't know. I mean, what about... But I mean, you can have something that comes out of an object which transcends the material of the object itself. I mean, I've got a couple of kids, and remember, you give them... my daughter has this very old, tattered little toy tiger now, and it's almost like part of the family. It's the nature of it being this piece of cloth with stuffing in it and a few buttons sewn on for eyes. It's now it has as much personality and identity as some of the other members of the family. So I think you can have something whereby the emotional and the psychological, which is all this consciousness stuff that you're talking about, this is all manifestations of it, can come out of that. Something has been birthed out of this stuffed tiger toy. So I think you could almost say something transcendent. Which if I got this toy and I threw it on the fire, God, I would never do this, but then it would cause absolute emotional heartbreak. It would probably cause a massive rift between me and my daughter. It would cause internal turmoil to me. So I think this idea of things in the physical world can very easily affect things in these other magisteria. So I don't think that's a kind of it's not a hard stop that for me at all. I would see that all these different magisteria of, emotion, consciousness, dreams, the psychedelic realm, these are all overlapping through me. And this is kind of why I do lean more towards this kind of, we could call it dualism, but it's kind of almost like an infinitalism of all these landscapes are overlapping through me. And it's kind of, I'm not necessarily in any particular control, but I am certainly experiencing them all. But I wouldn't necessarily be able to, and I'm experiencing them through consciousness, but also through the physical nature of my body. All of this combined is becoming part of my experience, and so for me, it's not a hard stop that something in the physical world is just purely physical and doesn't have any impacts further down the line. I don't think that's true at all. You could look at like religious artifacts as a kind of an example of that, I think.
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of things I could say to that. Well, I guess for the sake of brevity. So one thing that bothers me a lot is that what even is physical in the first place? Because I understand, the self consciousness. Even Sam Harris would say, what I really know, and really all I know is, I guess, consciousness. I know there's thoughts. I know there's feelings. There's myself and other minds, and they have feelings too. But when I think about what it is to be physical, I don't find that word to really have a lot of meaning. It sounds like we're just talking about experiences at the end of the day. Whenever someone says, well, this chair is physical, and they knock on it and they say, see, it feels hard. And I go, okay, really? All you're referencing there is just your experience. You're just saying it feels hard. Like at the end of the day, it has this sensation. I'm not seeing how that refers to anything other than experiences. So I guess I could ask you, well, what is physical? What does it even mean to be physical?
Yeah, so I think in response to what you just outlined, I think we have a capability of recognizing when something is physical but is not conscious. And the classic one of this would be something that is dead. Like if you could see me now, and obviously you could go down all the kind of philosophical, or that I could just be a scripted automaton, and that I'm not really conscious. I'm just scripted, and I'm saying all this stuff. But I think, I think most of us hold the worldview that we accept that the other people that we're interacting with are equally, that they are conscious. But then you can have someone which is not conscious, and you recognize that, and you don't even need to go as far as death. You can have someone under anesthesia, and under that anesthesia, the person themselves, their consciousness will turn off. I've been under anesthesia many times, and it's stark, the difference between that experience and the experience of dreaming. The experience of dreaming feels sequential along with your experiences of being awake. Experience kind of continues through it. Anesthesia, consciousness turns off almost like a light switch. Now, I've got a further kind of experience of this because I have epilepsy. And so I have sort of, moments where consciousness completely got like Rob ceases to exist in those moments. So this is not like psychedelic kind of ego death where there's some kind of awareness, but but it's not Rob anymore because Rob the self has been destroyed. No, this is non-existence. And then the interesting part of that experience is that after non-existence, Rob will start coming back on in stages, and to the point where, as I've come round from a seizure, I will start acting like a very young, immature child, and gradually like scale up through my sort of experience. It's almost like memory coming back online, until after about 20 minutes, I'm more or less me again. So that's, although I won't recommend that experience to anyone, it sucks, but it is interesting that consciousness can be turned off. And so that does, and I don't like this particular kind of fact of the matter, but that does somewhat indicate to some kind of material source, because you can turn it on and off with certain drugs or certain manipulations of the brain. And that's a completely different thing to being asleep or being on psychedelics, where, again, the sense of Rob can completely disappear, but that awareness continues. And that to me, that contrast between what I've just outlined with sort of epilepsy and anesthesia, that feels like it's a hard one to get away from the material aspect of it. So what I try and look to do is to incorporate the material and the sort of the consciousness and psychedelics, and so that's why I come to this more sort of dualistic position. But maybe you could comment on that, like what would you say regarding that stuff around anesthesia and being able to manipulate the brain?
Oh yeah, so thank you for sharing that. By the way, that was very compelling. I'm sorry that you go through those experiences. That must be rough, but I'm glad you're okay and you're all good there.
It's
life. I have friends who also deal with that, and but yeah, there are those like Bernardo Castro and some others as well who argue that actually, when it comes to anesthesia and stuff like that, consciousness isn't turning off. Rather, it's what they would call meta consciousness. So to be more specific, there's, how you're aware of things right now, but you can also be aware of the fact that you're aware. You're feeling things. You have an awareness of that right now. Well, if that gets turned off, let's imagine that being turned off. Awareness is still there. Consciousness is still there. It's just it's almost as if the record button hasn't been pushed. Almost, it's a bad analogy, but it's like your memory. You may not remember those experiences. You may not have been aware of those experiences, but that doesn't mean there is no experiences. And so, there's other, neurological evidence people try to bring up and say, well, there are dreams, even though they don't remember them, or, it doesn't seem like they had it from their perspective. They see areas of the brain lighting up and all that. So I don't know if I buy those arguments, but it's just a point to bring up, I could say, that it's possible that, no, consciousness isn't being turned off. It's just meta consciousness that's being turned off. And another point to bring up is, I didn't really see a definition of physical in what you said. I don't see what it actually means to be a material or physical thing. I know what it means to be a mental thing, because I am a mental thing. I know it first person. I have thoughts and experiences. But my problem is I just don't really know what it really means to be physical.
Okay, let me take a stab at it then. I guess what it means to be physical is to interact with what appears to be a physical realm. So my experience is, for want of a better word, I'm not using perfect sort of language here, but again, hopefully you get the point. So my experience is contained within a sort of a boundary of me. I cannot, as I sit here right now, I cannot experience New York City. I can't go and touch the pavement there. I can't call a cab there or buy a hot dog. I can't do that. My conscious experience is restricted within this physical container. Now, within that, I can now then go and buy a ticket and go to New York City or anywhere else. But what I can see, what I can hear, what I can interact with within this sort of whatever we want to call this plane of existence is kind of restricted to the limitations of this body. So I can only see the things that I can see with my eyes. If I was made blind, I wouldn't be able to see at all. So we could almost think of the physicality is the parameters which define how I can interact with reality. On some level, no, it depends. Again, I'm just talking about physical reality here, because as we know, I kind of believe in sort of many layers of kind of reality and stuff like that. But if we're just talking about purely physical reality, of if I wanted to go and jump in the lake, then I am dependent upon this physical presence to be able to go and jump in the lake. And if I was disabled and my legs couldn't work or I couldn't swim or whatever, that's going to impact my ability to have that experience. Was that a good effort at it, or did that work?
No, I get it. Yeah, especially from like a common sense perspective. I'm not trying to hold you to like the standards of like a metaphysician, super philosopher. So like,
it's a really good question, and it's something that I to be honest, I hadn't, I guess, really thought about before. And I think that's the thing with with a lot of these kind of stuff. We know what we think material is, because again, we're all kind of used to it, with just a knife and fork in our hand and stuff like that. But yeah, it is a great question. Like, what is it to be physical? Because I would completely agree that this entire conversation that we are having now is happening. It is within my consciousness. It is only happening, or I'm only aware of it because it is happening within my consciousness. But it's also happening on a physical level to me, and this is why I have no problem with these two worlds just existing in some sort of symbiosis, a kind of yin yang sort of thing, where not one of them is required as a precursor to the other, and no more than some of the more weirder states of being. And you can get into very, very weird states of being, particularly when you start experimenting with psychedelic drugs,
right?
Which don't feel like either of these things. It doesn't feel like it feels like some sort of like hyperdimensional, math going on. And you could, and that would actually even be reductionist to then say, well, that's consciousness. It's like, I don't know. It could be something. It could be a third thing. Let me put the question back to you. Like, how would you? Would you define like a physical being in any way, or would you just not?
Yeah. So, oh gosh, I just had a little bit of a brain fart here. So what you said earlier about what a physical thing is. Oh yeah, I had a question. Before I answer that, I had a question for you. Would you say objects and dreams are physical objects too?
No.
Okay, because haven't you been in a dream before where you swore it was waking life? You thought it was just as physical as this world.
Absolutely.
But then you found out, it was a dream. So what's the difference? I mean, it seems like the objects in waking life and the objects in dreams they don't really seem to be really all that different in kind. Some might be more bizarre than others, but they look the same. They feel the same. It just seems like, this definition of physical seems insufficient in many ways, because it seems like the objects in dreams also would count as physical, but we don't want to say they're physical. So, a rhetorical, you could answer this if you want, but a rhetorical question, I guess, is what's the difference between a dream object and a waking life object?
Well, I would say within the context of the dream, not a lot. But I would also say that if back to how I defined physical as the parameters of some limitation around it, that doesn't really apply in dream. I could be disabled and not have use of my legs, and have use of my legs within dream. I mean, there's one of the common things that crops up a lot in psychedelia is people who are blind who can have psychedelic visions. And I mean, I'm not sure what the stuff is around whether people who are blind have visual dreams or not, but I would assume they do. So the limitations of the physical sort of go away in that sense. And I would say you could also map that same thing onto a very, very convincing video game or simulation. If you start going to simulation theory, if you're in such a convincing simulation with perfect kind of like haptic feedback and stuff like that, then you could say, well, what's the difference between? But we would know that the game isn't real. Like, that's not actual sort of, the Grand Theft Auto of the future is not sort of consciousness. And I would, I tend to think of dream as a kind of like its own magisteria of it's got its own kind of things going on, but it doesn't have this same kind of hard limitation. And, I suppose you could, ask a question like, if everything is just consciousness and there is no sort of real penalty to matter or why is anyone disabled or why is anything bad happening? It just seems like there actually is some kind of hard cash value to matter where it's not easily replaceable, whereas going to the psychedelic world or the dream world or the simulation world and those things, I mean, hey, I can do whatever I want to in video games. I can smash up Lamborghinis all day long in Grand Theft Auto. So I would say going back to the Occam's razor sort of thing, it does seem to point to the fact that there is something real about the physical realm.
Oh yeah, because I definitely want to say there's definitely realism going on here. Like, I think everything happening around me right now is real. I just don't see any reason to call it physical. And it's just so interesting that, because there are people out there who have recurring dreams where they can walk just fine in waking life, but they're in a dream and now they're paralyzed and now they can't. They try to punch the demon and all of a sudden their arms can't move, and so it's strange. The point you're saying about how there's these limitations in waking life, and so there's a physical. Well, sometimes there's limitations in dreams, where in waking life they're just fine, but in dreams they're not. So it's to me it's more of it could be more psychological. There's psychological reasons why this is happening, and this does not necessarily mean your psychology, because like I said, there's a fundamental one. So just like how we might say there are psychological reasons why somebody might be paralyzed in a dream, we might say, well, maybe that represents it's your anxiety is paralyzing you, or blah, 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 something like that. You could say the same thing about waking life. So just like how we explain things in dreams, it can be explained in waking life. And I guess something I should get back to help answer your question, if I'm not getting too far ahead, is you asked, well, how do I define physical? Or what do I mean by it, or something like that?
Yeah.
And I guess to answer that quickly too, it's just that I don't think there is an answer. This is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, by the way. It's the entry on physicalism, and this is such a big question. It's even called the condition question. about what is it to be physical? What is the conditions that make something physical? And you can see that, there's all these attempts that they try to take. There's this way of trying to define it. There's that way. There's this, way that they try to use for physics and all of that. And in my opinion, I just think all attempts at trying to define that word have just really failed. I'm not seeing a coherent definition of what it means to be physical. And whenever I get one, it seems very susceptible to counterexamples, and particularly when it comes to dreams. But that's not the only way. But so I'm just like, so when I try to think of what a physical thing is, really, I just go back to what a mental thing is. Because like Sam Harris says, it's really all I know. It's really all I can know. So I don't even bother with that language. I don't really need to call anything physical. I just call it experiential.
I forgot with like the Sam Harris language. I think the phrase I kind of heard him use to describe these things most is that everything that you kind of know is objects within consciousness. It's that's all. If I am Rob, I am having an experience. It's all happening within my consciousness. So, but then I think you can flip that on sort of around a bit. If it was 100% provable and true that materialism was actually the one true thing, it would not change anything about my experience. It would still be the same thing. So if consciousness was emerging out of my sort of brain meat, still everything I ever know and every object I've ever encountered and this conversation on that would still be happening within consciousness. It doesn't actually sort of shift the playing field. And I think this applies to any sort of viewpoint where people kind of try and get to like particularly with people coming from like the solipsistic view. Well, you know that solipsism is true because everything you are the only sort of consciousness you've ever interacted with, therefore you must be the only one. It's like, well, it would be exactly the same if there was, if everyone had their own consciousness. It would. I'm not going to experience your consciousness. I can only experience my own because that's within, if anything, I think that actually points more in favor of the physicalness because it points more to the boundary rather than some sort of kind of, free flowing sort of energy that just happens to be, organize itself into instances within itself without any sort of boundary. Now we've got something where there is clearly hard boundaries to it. Either there is a me and there is a you, and we're interacting with things and we're interacting with other objects. Again, it seems like if we're going for simplicity, or if we're going for something that feels more intuitive, and again, just a sort of thing, I'm not sort of super in favor of this, but I think materialism kind of seems to win out in that regard. And I think in order to accommodate the more kind of exotic sort of worldviews of that consciousness is something that's not just tied to sort of the meat brain, then we have to really get away, from this kind of idea of consciousness needs to come first and start kind of crowbarring it in through various kind of arguments, because I don't think the arguments actually hold up too well. Certainly the simplicity argument doesn't hold up too well. And I think we have to start looking at more kind of out there theories of like, like I've described, of these things all happening in tandem at the same time, sort of feeding off each other, looping back into each other. And, with sort of infinite variations of this going into, emotional kingdoms, psychedelic kingdoms, dream kingdoms, sort of psychological kingdoms, time as it's, all these different sort of very weird models are kind of interacting with each other, and this is it. and so, yeah, I think this need to put one in front of the other and say, that's it. It actually feels a little unimaginative to me, to be honest. But that's only because I've absolutely pickled myself with some very bizarre experiences.
Well, because I think we're raised in a very dualistic culture. And notice how you keep saying putting one in front of the other. right? See, I'm not saying that there's two different things and that there's consciousness first and then there's non-consciousness. That's all there is consciousness. There's only one type of stuff. It's not that it comes first. It's that that's all there is. And
yeah, but you're saying that it's all there is, but in the process of it being there, all there is, it has to basically simulate the other thing. And the reason for it doing that, particularly if, as we talked about earlier, if we're going down an entire galaxy, epoch spanning billions and billions of years, and all the signs of something very material happening, if it's doing that, then that just seems like a very bizarre process. If the thing is to have systems which are instances of the prime system, why have all the other stuff?
But what even is material? See, I can't come to believe that anything is material until we actually have an understanding of what it even means to be material. And I just don't believe we've done so. If you want, I could even show you a clip from, you know who Noam Chomsky is?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's several clips I could show you where Noam Chomsky is saying, and I even posted this recently on Twitter, where he says on video, you can't ask the question of how the physical and non-physical can interact until you define what physical means. And the word physical has pretty much lost all meaning since the time of Newton. It's been pretty vacuous for hundreds of years. We keep using this word material because we're all just used to it. But if you actually analyze it, I mean, it doesn't really seem to point to anything other than experience, is the argument I want to say. And think about a dream. Notice how you said before how there's boundaries between yourself and other people. Mm-hmm. That's the case in dreams as well. There's you, the dreamer, and there's other dream characters, and they seem to be different people than you. There's a whole world that you experience. However, that world is entirely mental in nature. There's no need at all to introduce this word physical or material. You can make sense of everything in terms of just experiences and subjects, all that stuff.
Okay, I just got a little bit sort of. Can you repeat the Chomsky quote again, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Chomsky says, you can't answer the question about how the physical and non-physical can interact until you define what physical means. Well, I'm just not seeing a sufficient definition of material and physical. Not just from you. It's from philosophy.
Yeah, sure. No,
general.
I understand.
Right? Yeah.
I think I personally I don't have that sort of problem because I don't know if I could also define emotional. Now, I think emotional states are also equally real, and I would define them as something that is clearly different to dream states, something that is different to psychedelic states, something that is different to, the anesthesia states. So I would say I think emotions is something else where I could put certain fluffy, descriptions around it, and it's just one of those things where I'm like, yeah, that's fine. That's kind of what it is. And if somebody else tells me that they're experiencing one of those emotions, I don't need for them to be able to define it for it to sort of make sense. I can get it. I get what they're on about. And it's just like if someone tells me about a dream or a psychedelic trip they had, I don't necessarily need them to be able to sort of, or even consciousness itself is something that's really not been very well defined. And I don't think it's still particularly sort of well defined, but I get it. So I think, I can certainly accept that my wording of what is physical is might not be, sufficient. But I think, I would say most people listening to this conversation, it's just we just kind of intuitively know the physical is the realm that we are inhabiting, and yeah. So I don't think the fact that it's kind of it's undefined. Well, actually, let me flip the question a bit. So what would consciousness be then? How would you define consciousness?
Yeah. I like how even Sam Harris uses this definition. And there's other philosophers like Thomas Nagel, David Chalmers, stuff like that, who say that what we mean by consciousness is what it is like to be the subject, what it is like to be you. And I like the examples. I like the example you used. And those were all mental examples you used. There was emotion. We can't quite define emotion. And even consciousness. I'm sympathetic. We can't fully, in words, describe consciousness. But the difference is, with consciousness and emotions and stuff like that, we have direct and immediate awareness of these things. When it comes to matter, they want to say matter, or the physical, they want to say it's more than just experience. And, I'm directly acquainted with experience. I may have a hard time putting experiences into words, like, what's the experience of joy? That's kind of hard. But I know what joy is from the first person. However, matter is supposed to be something different than experience. But all I have to go off of is experience. So when they tell me there's a material world that's different than experience, I'm just like, what do you mean? Because experience I know about, emotions I know about, consciousness I know about. I am directly and immediately aware of them. Matter, I don't know. What does that even word mean? And even in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the author is a physicalist, and he says this is a perfectly legitimate question. We can ask this, and if the physicalist can't answer it, why believe there is such a thing as physical? I mean, you don't even know what it is. So that's just my perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a couple of points. I would say that with emotion as well, I think there are also instances where that you would not necessarily be experiencing it. Certainly in moments of very heightened emotion, particularly something where it's kind of bordering on traumatic, then you can have people who have practically zero awareness of what's going on. You can have complete systemic sort of shutdown. So I think emotion itself can reach such peaks that you're not actually sat there like, I'm actually afraid now. I'm if go watch a sort of a nature documentary of the deer being hunted by the lion on the Serengeti, and it's like you're not really seeing a creature going, I think I'll go left now, I think I'll go right now. You're seeing some kind of complete autopilot going on. So I do think there are that emotion itself can lead to there can be a place where you are feeling intense emotion, or there's some sort of like bodily override going on, and you are completely sort of unaware of it. And often the kind of becoming aware of it later on can in fact be incredibly traumatic. So you see this a lot with people coming out of combat situations. So yeah, but I would also just for the kind of the definition of physical thing, then I mean maybe it is something that we need to put more thought into defining it. I think maybe one of the problems with it is that it's kind of taken somewhat for granted.
Yeah.
Whether that rightly or wrongly, and so there's not been as much thought put into the sort of the definition of it. Whereas with consciousness, again, it is a much more exotic, much more interesting sort of field, and it's blending over into all these different realms of dreams, psychedelics, just waking consciousness. It's such a fascinating topic. So it does kind of conjure up much more discussion. But then I suppose with like some of the other kind of belief systems that I've interacted with, I spent some time in South America in sort of traditional shamanism cultures, and there they would talk about sort of spirit as another thing. So there you have, they firmly believe in that there is a physical world, and the physical world is where the plants and stuff are growing, and the plants contain spirits, and you can physically consume the spirits and then have these very sort of psychedelic experiences. And obviously, and then they would also say that is your consciousness having that experience, that you are taking the plant spirit into you, and that is kind of merging with your consciousness. But these things are kind of like another form of, like sentience. That these things are not gods as such, but that they have, there is power there, that there is a spirit realm. And when you go and you can partake in these ceremonies, and you can have that experience. And I've certainly had it where it's like, I get it now. It does indeed feel like there is a third stuff going on here. And if there's a third, and then you can actually, within sort of psychic experience, you can experience multiple layers of this stuff. So, there's, again, hyperdimensional DMT entities and sort of, math, fourth dimensional maths coming from a, black hole tesseract and stuff like that. So then it just kind of leads this position of like, actually, it's just like there's infinite stuff going on here, and it's just all happening all at once, and it's kind of awesome. And I think, and it doesn't necessarily all just like for you. I think I understand what you're saying is that for you, it kind of intuitively feels like it's all consciousness, and I get that. And I think for most people listening, the majority of people listening, people tend to come from a materialist thing, because that intuitively makes sense until that belief is challenged. But then, like I say, you can push it even further and end up in much stranger things where there's sort of 3 or 4, 5 infinite different things. But I mean, let's just stick with the shout. I mean, I don't know if you've had any other kind of more these kind of like psychedelic or experiences, but have you experienced anything like that yourself, or
Sure.
anything which has challenged, added additional layers onto it?
Absolutely, yes. I have had mushrooms before, and I did have like a very powerful psychedelic experience with that before. And I've also just had mystical experiences, like religious experiences, where there's this ineffability and there's this unifying sense. A lot of mystical, even in the Stanford Encyclopedia, it talks about this. When you look up trends in most mystical experiences, there's those two main elements. They tend to be very unifying. There's a sense in which people feel like they're one with the universe, or one with everything. And there's this sense in which it's almost unspeakable. You can't quite talk about it. And as an idealist, I totally can see where someone might want to go further, because it's like, well, idealism is something you can talk about. Consciousness you can talk about, but there seems to be more than what we can talk about. And I, at the end of the day, I do agree, because notice how the other stuff you talked about, this third stuff, it's experiential. It's something you can experience. Maybe you can't talk about it. Maybe you don't have a philosophical argument for it, but it's something that you can experience. So what that tells me is that no matter what this other stuff is, it is experiential. It exists in such a way that it can be experienced. And so, to me, that's a major clue about the nature of these things, because how is it that I can experience it, even if it is this something different than what I normally experience in waking life? And so I just keep going back to experience at the end of the day. But ultimately, I've had these mystical experiences. I've had experiences where it's like you can't quite put it into words, and I can't put it in a metaphysical system. I'm still convinced of idealism, but I get the ineffable quality and how there's just something way more than the human mind can think of and experience. There's so much more. And so I totally am sympathetic to all of that.
Cool. Well, I mean, it is a really sort of fascinating subject, and it's interesting because it does make you, just like you've sort of challenged with the what is physical. Then, I think it's something I enjoy, just kind of like pulling at these different threads, and it is something where it's kind of almost like has forced me into this kind of fence sitting position, because I cannot dispute my interactions with the physical world. I also cannot dispute my interactions with some of these psychedelic experiences. And with a lot of the sort of like the arguments from idealism, I can get behind a lot of this stuff. I just think to me, to fill the gaps of any of these kind of systems, they all have to sort of go into the same container. So I have to throw them into the blender and just make a kind of a sort of a epistemological smoothie out of it. And to me, that then sort of works with all these kind of things kind of feeding into it. Right. I did, since we mentioned Sam Harris a few times in here, because I am a bit of a Sam Harris fanboy. I think he's for me is one of the better voices out there in terms of being able to present like a sort of a rational, secular, but still very respectful of these kind of various different experiences, psychedelic experiences, meditation experiences, experience on the self. But I watched your conversation with yourself and Bernardo, and it seemed like there was a section there where the pair of you were kind of like wailing on Sam Harris a bit. And although I will just say, just for the benefit of the audience, although I'm using kind of, when I say I'm a Sam Harris fanboy, it's kind of tongue in cheek. I don't agree with absolutely everything he says. I just think, I don't think anybody should agree with anything that with everything that somebody says. There should always be some kind of disagreements there. But I think that as a and as a guy, it's like more. I agree with a lot more than I disagree with, and I think the stuff that he's put out there and the body of work he's put out there is very good. But yeah, I thought in particular Bernardo seems to have a bit of a chip on his shoulder about Sam Harris, and I just thought I'd show you. I actually, because it seemed, I don't know if you still talk to Bernardo, I actually think he undoes a lot of the sort of very interesting stuff he says, because he gets seemed like petty when Sam, like the rants he goes on about Sam Harris are bordering like kind of cringy. It's like, okay, dude, like for show me on the doll where Sam Harris touched you, kind of thing.
Bernardo's a passionate fellow, absolutely. Yeah, and to me, it's like how I see it is, because I know he's a very reasonable guy, he's a polite guy. But it's almost like, how like if you're going to like let's say you're in a fight and you're going to punch somebody, you don't punch as if you're just going to make contact with them. And then like how like if you see a girl hit a punching bag, she just touches it and draws back. No, you want to punch it as if you're going to punch through it. Even though you're not going to actually punch through it, you want to punch as if you are. So I think he's using this rhetoric. He's trying to use this rhetoric where he's trying to punch through. Because idealism is such a minority view, he has to get your attention somehow. He has to reach out to you. And so that's just me reading his mind. I don't know if that's actually true. I think he means what he says, but I think he's using charged rhetoric because we need to break the Overton window for metaphysics. We need to reach out, And so that's one way. But for Sam Harris, I want to say first off, too, and I'm not saying this to soften any blows. I think he is brilliant. I used to get really into the atheism versus theism debates back in the day, and I've always thought Sam was the highest tier of the new atheist crew. Like, he's really smart. I agree with him on a lot, like the irreducibility of consciousness. He makes really good arguments against dualism. So, like, there's actually a lot I actually do agree with him on. I just think that he hasn't given idealism a chance, because when you look at, I even have some notes here, when you listen to what Harris says about idealism, I'm not saying this to be mean, this is just factually correct. It sounds like like a freshman who hasn't read Berkeley. Because like anybody who's read Berkeley, even if they disagree with Berkeley, they can refute everything Harris said and say, idealists have a response to everything you just said, and I'm not even an idealist. So if you want, I can quickly go through them. It won't even take long.
Yeah, but please do, because I understand that was the kind of the nature of the dispute, that you felt Sam Harris wasn't adequately representing what idealism was, and so that when he was shooting it down, he was doing it in a kind of like an amateurish way. Now, total disclaimer, I feel that, I'm sure, I can only guess that Sam Harris has looked into this much more than I have. So if he's gonna get his ass ripped open by yourself and Bernardo, then God only knows what someone like Bernardo would make of this. But please do, if you.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah, if you've got what it was that Sam Harris said and how we dismissed it, then yeah, please do sort of quote it, because I watch a lot of Sam stuff, but I don't know specifically what it was that it was being referred to.
Yeah, so there's a clip of him on Lex Fridman. And I forgot the name of the clip. You could type in Sam Harris, Lex Fridman, and there's a clip where idealism is in the title, and you can see it. And I really mean this. I think you have been giving much more thoughtful criticisms of idealism than Sam. So please don't sell yourself short. I've been an idealist for like 10 plus years. You've been giving way more thoughtful criticisms than he did. And I really mean that. And
Oh, thank you.
you and I are both laymen. I'm pretty sure Sam Harris is smarter than both of us. I'm sure if we took an IQ test, I bet he'd beat us on an IQ test. I just think he hasn't given idealism the time of day. He hasn't given it a chance. So I'll quickly say this. He mentioned that he thinks idealism involves these big coincidences when it comes to accounting for the regularity of what we experience, like in science, how there seems to be laws and stuff like that. Berkeley answers that very easily by saying, well, there's a fundamental mind that sets order in the universe, just like how a dreamer, he can control the dream if he wants, like a lucid dreamer. God has, he is the fundamental mind that grounds the universe. And so things behave in a consistent and reliable way because he is consistent and reliable. And so, you can also be an objective idealist. You can think there really is an objective reality that it exists independently of minds, but its nature is mental. So an idealist can easily account for regularities and science. And I mean, Berkeley goes back 300 years. I mean, Berkeley answered this hundreds of years ago. Sam also thinks idealism is anthropocentric, which you really don't need to look at it that way. I mean, Berkeley believes what's fundamental is a non-human mind. He thinks it's not humans that are at the center of the universe. It's the opposite. He thinks minds are, but that doesn't mean human minds. So the consciousness of plants and animals, and if you're a panpsychist, maybe planets have minds, maybe stars have minds, who knows? So, and the last point I'll make is he thinks objects disappear when you're not looking at them under idealism. And that's just not true. Even, like I said, you can have an objective reality, so of course it still exists. But even if you're like Berkeley and you think it's subjective, he thinks all things are being observed at all times by God. So even if you're not looking at the moon, God is still looking at the moon. So it's not like things disappear when you're not looking at them. So I think he just has a... Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds more like that he was kind of describing something much more like solipsism then, whereas that if everything is because within that kind of worldview, I mean, again, I keep on just putting this together. There are so many different flavors of solipsism stuff, but one of them is that, it's like things stop existing, including other people stop existing. In fact, if somebody walks in through this door, it's only because I've imagined them subconsciously. In fact, I'm subconsciously imagining your response to me now. And so, it kind of goes into all sorts of weird things. So it sounds like maybe that's where Sam was going, in which case I would agree with the criticism that maybe sort of he's got that part wrong. There was something he said in the first statement. So it was something about the consistency of the experience.
Yeah.
And I think he said something along the lines of that God, the fundamental mind, sort of imagined it that way. But again, this seems like it would then have to tie back into this process I talked about it earlier on, where in order for the consistency of the experience to be happening within the fundamental consciousness, then all the other kind of stuff which is affecting the experience would also be in place. So therefore, like things like gravity would also have to be in place, and the gravity would be in place because of the way that our solar system is, and the way the amount of sunlight that we get is happening because of the way that the Earth goes around the sun, and that's happening because of the particular arm of the Milky Way and the cosmic cluster, and blah blah blah. So all that sort of galactic evolutionary stuff would have had to also be in place, and I think that I'm going to extend some charity here, and that's maybe what he's referring to, is that it's all the things that are happening within the experience. There is a consistency to it, and this consistency we can check between different people. That consistency is happening because there do appear to be certain laws and stuff in place, certain fields in place, gravity fields keeping our feet on the planet. That is happening because it seems like there has been some sort of system-wide evolution to get it here. And then if that evolution had to happen with space dust turning into clumps, turning into volcanoes, turning into planets, blah, 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 it seems very it's very long-winded and it just seems a little bit clunky. Now, could all that be happening within the fundamental mind? Absolutely. Why not? That's equally just as kind of bonkers as some of these psychedelic ideas. Hey, let's dream up a universe where we have to have atoms which form dust, which form planets, which form systems and ignite into stars. Why not? It's just as crazy as the star god baby waving its arm and consciousness bursts into existence and other crazy shit happens. So, yeah, but I think, anyway, all that sort of stuff aside, I think the mistake I would say Bernardo is making is just being particularly, because, you can engage with Sam's misunderstanding of, like, if that's indeed what happened. Again, I'm not familiar with the quote in question, and you could deal with it in a charitable sort of good faith sort of just an engagement of it. And I've certainly seen Sam Harris engage with people he absolutely disagrees. I've seen him have huge discussions. Panpsychism he's discussed quite a lot on his platform. Lots of different theories of reality, all the Donald Hoffman stuff. Some guy who was arguing in favor that life shouldn't have existed at all, and that it was actually better if none of us had ever been born. And it was kind of those discussions can happen on the basis of good faith, whereas Bernardo just and don't get me wrong, I like Bernardo. In fact, I've considered a few times asking Bernardo to be a guest on the show, and the only reason I didn't go down that route is just because I thought this guy's just going to I'm just going to be like a gnat before this guy. He's just going to start talking in concepts which will go over my head, which is sort of where I thought this would go tonight. So I feel like I've done okay. But anyway, I think Bernardo could have been a lot less pissy about it, and I think he vastly just made his position look petty and arsey. And I would love to have seen that discussion. I think I would love to see someone like Sam and Bernardo, just like I really enjoyed seeing Sam Harris's discussions with Jordan Peterson, somebody else who would very fundamentally disagree with very different worldviews, but they approach each other in good faith. And I think Bernardo's completely shot himself in the foot there. Now, maybe he's not bothered about shooting himself in the foot. It sounds like he's bothered. It sounds like he's got a big chip on his shoulder about it. And, he's going down this route of like, oh, well, he won't debate me. Why would debate? It just like, dude, come on, put your big boy pants on. You're better than this.
I'm sympathetic to that. As you can tell, I have kind of like a more calm demeanor. I'm a bit more laid back. I'm not saying Brando isn't, but like I said before, I don't know him personally or anything like that. I suspect he's just using charged rhetoric because I think he's trying to break the Overton window. And so, but mm-hmm. I totally understand why someone might be turned off by that and think it's too aggressive. It's like it's like when someone wears too much cologne or something. You're like, oh, it's like kind of wards you off. Like, okay, I don't want to go near there. So it's like even though the substance of what he's saying is good, if that attitude can turn some people off, I understand why that can happen. And I make excuses for that behavior. I think there's a reason he does it, but I also understand why it turns people off. I get it. So I try to be more like he's the bad cop and I'll be the good cop. He'll come in all angry and I'll come with a cup of coffee like, hey, it's okay, I got your back.
Well, no, I think you've done a really great job of being the good cop, and thank you for sort of entertaining my, like I say, fence city sort of, devil's advocate-y, just throwing stuff out, rambling left, right, and centre. I've really, really enjoyed this discussion. Just as a kind of maybe a closing point, where do you think the Overton window is now then? So in terms of sort of idealism, where do you think it kind of sits within, say, culture or consciousness theory or whatever you want to call it? Is it something that's kind of accepted on some level? Would you say this is like a fringe theory or just what's your take on it?
Yeah, first thing I want to say, I've been really enjoying this conversation as well. And I've been really appreciating your thoughtful, good faith comments, your thoughts, objections, everything. I really appreciate it. there's so many people that just don't even give idealism a chance. And so just the fact that you're taking the time and being charitable, I truly appreciate that. But David Chalmers actually wrote a paper about this called Idealism and the Mind-Body Problem, where he notes how there's a shift that's happening right now. Here's what I predict is happening. They're going to move towards panpsychism first. So panpsychism is rising. And idealism is also rising. Idealism is more than it used to be, but it's still a minority view. In the professional Western field, it's only like 6% are idealists. But that number is growing. It used to be smaller. And so what I think is going to happen is first, panpsychism will become more popular as it has been growing. And then idealism will come very soon after. And people are being attracted to panpsychism because they're having a hard time making sense of this evolution of consciousness. How do we get consciousness to exist in the first place? And it sounds like if you start with non-consciousness and try to get consciousness out of it, there's this hard problem. And more scientists, philosophers, and even laymen are hearing more and more about this hard problem because we all want to make sense of ourselves. We're all subjects, and where do we fit in this reality? What is all this? And more materialism is waning. It's losing ground, and even dualism, which has already lost a lot of ground, is losing even more ground. So I think that's my prediction. Panpsychism will become way more popular than idealism will just. But that could take a very long time. It'll be a while before that happens. Materialism is still very much the dominant view in the academy and all that. So, yeah.
Interesting. I'd more or less share your thoughts around panpsychism. I think for me, particularly in the circles that I mix in, I see almost like a trajectory, and it's a fairly common trajectory. So you get the sort of like the hardcore sort of materialist. They have some of these psychedelic experiences, then they'll kind of tend to go very all sort of consciousnessy. If they end up going down the kind of the route of shamanism and sort of, then they'll start leaning towards sort of animism.
Yeah, that's right.
And then animism will sort of then, because then you get to a point with, like I described earlier, of like, well, if the plants have spirits, and because I would say even that's a leap for a lot of people to think of trees as kind of, conscious systems. I think we kind of thought of, kind of think of like trees as just a thing. They're not a living thing, but they're not conscious. But yeah, there could be a form of plant consciousness. And then, well, what would you, if you can't really, how do you know the plant's conscious? And that sort of creates like a stepping stone then to panpsychism. Well, how do you know the rock's not conscious? Like you say, is the sun conscious? It's doing something. There's a system going on there. It's kind of, it seems to be a lot of energy moving around. Why would the sun not be conscious? So I think that sort of, that shamanism route in particular does tend to, I've seen people drift towards panpsychism just as a way of going through that, because you end up on it seems to be quite compatible with this fence sitting position that I'm kind of in, whereby you kind of get to the point like, oh, I absolutely don't know anymore. It's, yeah, sure. I mean, anything could be conscious. Why couldn't the rock be conscious? What would I expect it to do differently if it was conscious? I mean, it's a rock. It's not going to walk off. So, and so I think, yeah, it does feel like, certainly within my circles, panpsychism's kind of, I would say, is one of the theories that's floating to the top. Whether that actually then goes across into the mainstream, don't know. I think it's quite a leap for like the everyday folks.
At least for now.
Maybe there's, I think there would have to be some kind of sort of like, panpsychism kind of guru, someone who can like bridge that kind of gap in the way that someone like, say, like Stephen Hawking did for science, or for astronomy, and every so often you get one of these kind of Richard Dawkins did for biology. So someone who can just bridge that gap to make something ultra accessible to the general sort of public. I think when that person for panpsychism emerges, then yeah, maybe that could happen. And I think maybe that needs to happen for for idealism too. I don't think Bernardo's that guy, and this is absolutely no disrespect to him at all. I think his work's fascinating, but there's a difference between being, somebody like that and being kind of like, like Bill Nye the Science Guy or like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Someone who can just bridge that gap, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if people like that emerge out of the mainstream, and that would then completely shift that Overton window.
Absolutely, and I've even talked about this with Bernardo. He's very humble about this. He knows that he's not the final form of idealism, and neither is someone like me. There's all of our best guys are dead. Like, I'm not even kidding. All the best idealists are no longer alive. If you go back in time and you read like Arthur Schopenhauer and like F.H. Bradley, like these guys are so much more brilliant than myself and like anybody who's alive. So I'm hoping one day there will be a very charismatic idealist who is just can really convey this to a broader audience, because Bernardo's good, and I'm good, but there's better. There's got to be someone better than us, someone who can really, really reach people in a way that we just can't. So we'll do our best. We'll do what we can, but I feel the same way. I think the same thing for panpsychism. There's going to be someone or a group or something like that where they're going to really be able to reach out to people and change minds. But it'll take time, for sure.
Yeah. And maybe that person, maybe that hungry young mind is watching this conversation now, and we've started the gears turning, and they're going to go off and find your channel and Bernardo's work, and then maybe they'll get all these things rolling and become that person in the future.
True.
And I'll say on that note, I will put links to your channel in the description below. I'll give you the sort of the closing statements. Is there anything you want to say to point people at any particular like social media feeds or anything else, any particular materials that you want people to go and check out?
Yeah, I guess you can find me on Twitter or X, just at monism_idealism. I'm on YouTube as well. And I have a Discord server called Idealism Forever. If you want to just chat with me, if you have any questions, you can reach me there on Discord, or I have an email address in my About section. I'm very open to just answering questions and just hearing out your comments. So I'm very reachable. If anybody wants to talk with me, I'm open. I'm here for you. I can help you out, no problem. And go ahead and follow me. I'm doing live streams too, called Idealism Forever on my channel. So check out my YouTube channel. I'm going to keep streaming. And yeah, I really appreciate this time, Rob. I thank you so much for hearing me.
Likewise, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. And thank you. First of all, thank you for reaching out. It's an absolute, it's a pleasure for someone to want to reach out and have a conversation with me, because like I say, like, who am I? it's great to get this opportunity and have my ideas challenged. And I think this has been a really great conversation, everything that you've said, I would mirror back to yourself. That it's been approached this in really good faith. You've been very patient with me, and I do really appreciate it. And yeah, maybe let's do this again. Let me have a bit of a think about it, see if I can pin down this definition of what it is to be physical, and we'll take another stab at it at some time.
Absolutely. I would love to talk with you again. And thank you to the audience as well for giving idealism a chance. Thanks for watching. And subscribe to Rob. If you're not already, subscribe to this guy. Check him out. He's awesome.